Echoes of a Forgotten Nation: The True History of Native Americans. Before the United States ever existed, this land was home to thriving nations, vibrant cultures, and deeply rooted traditions. Vast plains stretched endlessly, rivers nourished thriving communities, and the sky bore witness to ceremonies that bridged the earth and spirit worlds. These were not scattered, ragged tribes as misrepresented in history, but intricate societies with languages, trade networks, and systems of governance that flourished for millennia. As the screen opens, we see cinematic vistas, towering mountains, unbroken forests, and the warmth of firelight against a starry backdrop. Tribes converse in unity, warriors stand vigilant, and elders weave their wisdom into younger generations. Narration enters with a powerful proclamation. Before America, there was a nation without borders, whose heart beat in harmony with nature. But soon, a storm descended upon this tranquil existence, and what followed was not the story of discovery, but the story of resistance, betrayal, and survival. This is the untold history of Native Americans, a story too long ignored, yet vital for us all to understand. For thousands of years, indigenous peoples thrived across the lands we now call North America. These nations were as diverse as they were vast, with over 500 distinct tribes. From the Iroquois Confederacy in the Northeast, known for its advanced political alliances, to the thriving cities of the Mississippian peoples in Cahokia, native cultures were complex and varied. Their lives were deeply tied to the land. The rivers were their lifelines, the forests their sanctuaries, and the plains their sustenance. Every resource was honored and used wisely. Spirituality infused every act. Planting corn, hunting game, or crafting a bow was a sacred task. Theirs was not just survival, it was a flourishing civilization rooted in balance. Through trade and diplomacy, tribes created intricate networks that stretched across the continent. Shells from coastal regions, obsidian from the Rockies, and copper from the Great Lakes testified to the reach of their commerce. Native societies were not static but evolutionary, spanning centuries of adaptation and innovation. Then came the arrival of the colonizers. With their ships came promises of cooperation, trade, and curiosity. To many native tribes, the newcomers were strange but not unwelcome. Early Europeans benefited greatly from the generosity of native peoples, learning survival techniques and forming alliances to navigate the many challenges of this new land. But soon, curiosity turned to greed. The settlers' hunger for land knew no limits. Everywhere, the drive for expansion clashed with indigenous ways of life. Treaties were made, but none were meant to last. Colonizers sought possession, not partnership, and the deep scars of betrayal began to form. It was as though the very earth cried out in grief, narrates a voice laden with emotion, recalling how entire landscapes were transformed into battlegrounds. These lands were not just physical territories, they were sacred connections to the ancestors, the spirits, and the natural order of existence. Perhaps no single event encapsulates the sorrow inflicted upon Native Americans as starkly as the Trail of Tears. In 1830, the Indian Removal Act was passed, forcing thousands of Native people, especially members of the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole tribes, to leave their homes. What occurred next was not a relocation effort, as history books often sanitize it. It was a brutal, calculated act of ethnic cleansing. On foot through treacherous weather, families were herded like cattle and made to trek hundreds of miles away from their ancestral territories. Bloodlines and cultural legacies were lost along the trails as thousands perished from starvation, disease, and exhaustion. But even in these darkest moments, Native resistance endured. Oral histories from survivors handed down through generations are testaments to their resilience. "We may have been forced to leave our land," they said, "but our spirit will never leave this earth." The betrayal did not stop at physical displacement. Colonizers sought not only to take native lands but to erase native identities altogether. Indigenous children were separated from their families, sent to boarding schools where they were forbidden to speak their languages or practice their traditions. Sacred ceremonies were outlawed, vibrant clothing replaced by uniform drabness, and traditional names were forcibly stripped away. Colonization wasn't just about claiming land, it was about extinguishing the cultures that proved incompatible with European visions of domination. Imagine young children, confused and terrified, made to believe their way of life was inferior or wrong. They were taught to forget their roots, but the roots of a people run deeper than words or rituals. Beneath the surface, the spirit endured. Despite unimaginable cruelty, Native Americans resisted fiercely. Great leaders like Sitting Bull, Chief Joseph, and Tecumseh emerged to rally their people. Their battles were not only for tribal lands, but for dignity, autonomy, and survival. Though outnumbered and outgunned, these leaders inspired movements of bravery and defiance. Sitting Bull's victory over General Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn sent an indelible message: indigenous peoples would not vanish quietly. But resistance took many forms beyond the battlefield. Women, as keepers of tradition within many Native communities, preserved spiritual practices in secrecy. They sang songs, wove patterns, and whispered stories to their children, ensuring the legacies of their ancestors could survive for future generations. Post-war policies like the Dawes Act further fragmented indigenous lands and communities. The government sought to assimilate Native peoples by allotting them individual parcels of land, significantly reducing tribal territories and encouraging a shift to European-style farming, a lifestyle incompatible with many tribes' ways of living. This divide-and-conquer strategy devastated Native sovereignty. Once united by shared purpose and tradition, many communities now faced further isolation due to territorial and cultural disruption. And yet, within this imposed fragmentation, cultural unity somehow persisted. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the oppressive tide began to turn, if only slightly. The American Indian Movement, AIM, emerged in the 1960s as a powerful force for Native rights and justice. From land reclamation to the acknowledgement of treaties, organizations like AIM fought to reclaim what was stolen. Modern Native leaders and activists have revitalized their communities through legal challenges, cultural programs, and advocacy for recognition. The voices of indigenous storytellers and artists echo once more, louder and more powerful than ever. Tribes have regained lands, strengthened their governments, and revived languages once thought lost to time. This story of tragedy and resilience leaves us not in despair, but equipped with hard truths and inspiration for change. Today, Native Americans continue to fight for justice and recognition in a system that once sought to erase them. Their voices rise in legal forums, political arenas, and cultural spaces, demanding a rightful place in history and society. Let us honor their spirit by becoming better stewards of the lands we share, acknowledging the wrongs of the past, and supporting efforts to preserve Native cultures and rights. Ending where it began, our film closes with imagery of the same landscape seen in the opening: rivers flowing, forests standing tall, and fires burning once more. Across these sacred lands, the spirit of a people lives on. This is not just their history, it is our shared legacy, a living testament to a nation's strength, even in the face of unimaginable loss. The echoes of their stories remind us of our responsibility. Only by understanding the past can we hope to honor it, and only by working together can we ensure a future built on respect, inclusion, and unwavering justice.